Thank you, Matt. I appreciate that. I think most of that's still true. It was a long time ago now. 50 years. We're going to get to this nice round number that we've got to deal with. Some other thank yous, though. First, thanks, obviously, to Brian and to Susan for having me here. I appreciate that. Thanks to the nice lady who bought me a drink last night. There she is. I appreciate that a lot, although I'm a little uncomfortable because she bought me a drink and told me thanks for the talk. Always, before the talk, it sounds like a good idea. If this is really horrible and you want a refund, talk to Brian. He'd be happy to give you your money back for that bourbon. Well, it was good. Thanks also to Father McMahon for giving me a tough act to follow. Pete's got a new camera, and I want to make sure he can focus it down the 18 inches he's going to need to in order to get my face in the frame now. Thanks a lot, Father McMahon, for straining your necks. But here we are. And Brian, I have to admit, for a man of your erudition and attention to detail, to give a Mass celebration of the new Mass conference is, wait a second, that says problem, 50 years of problems. So for the lady who canceled her subscription, if you're out there watching, it's the problems that we're going to try to focus on. And she's a good lady. I'm gonna make it I'm not sure who she is, but we got to get her back. And we're going to talk about one of the sociological problems that we've got to deal with all this, and that is people who just have gotten turned upside down. So we've got an inversion problem within individuals, and it's a confusion of thinking and feeling. And rather than having an idea, knowing that it's right, and then having an emotional reaction to that, which might require some consolation or some mitigation, right? We have a feeling, and then we try to justify that intellectually. We're turned upside down as modern people. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. So the title of the talk is not mine. It was given to me by Brian, and he said, here, how about this? New music for a new Mass. And after a couple of seconds of silence, I asked him if he really wanted me to talk about this, because I didn't want it just to devolve into a 90-minute rant. Because there's much to get really worked up about. And this could be a corker. I'm not saying that it won't be, but I've got deniability because it's his title. But it actually makes sense. But we're going to need to start with some definitions. We're going to need to define Mass. We're going to need to define music. We're going to need to define how these things work together. What is new? What is old? We've got to hear some of the stuff that we'd rather not. Just like we have to see some of the stuff we'd rather not, but we deal as Catholics with actual reality. It seems like a redundant thing, but with real reality, as opposed to virtual reality. We deal with intellectual reality as opposed to emotional reality, quote unquote. So we've got to get a little bit real. Here's where we begin. We begin where we are. William Byrd, 1589, writes a magnificent piece. And we're going to start with a little consolation and a little bit of desolation. Zion has become a wilderness. Jerusalem is made desolate. That's what I'm talking about when I say an emotional consolation as the result of recognizing intellectually a big problem. And if you want to know what desolation looks like, there she blows. We got into this, and we're starting the introductory rant now. We got into this through sin and through pride. We're only going to get out of it through prayer. All right. So here's the outline. I will get through this as quickly as possible because I'm going to get you to lunch. I have to give a little bit of an introductory rant, but I'm going to try to keep that within reasonable bounds. We got to have some principles and definitions. Father alluded to Pascendi. We're going to read some of these things. What is modernism? Because it's part of the problem. We'll talk a little bit about what's actually out there, what is going on when it comes to music in support of the new Mass. And we'll leave with hope. The conclusion is that it's going to get better. It's going to get better. All right, rant, you say. Why on earth would I need a rant? Well, look. This has got to stop. Right? My grandmother once told me, and I'm sure various of our grandmothers all told us this at some point, if you can't say something nice about someone, don't say anything about it. Well, I'm sorry, Grandma. This is not going to be a particular attack on any particular individual, but when it comes to talking about this thing that is, we'll call it the culture that surrounds the new theology, the culture of the new springtime, and everything that goes with it, it's got to stop. St. Pius X nails it. He rips the mask away. Popes before him did as well. But it is a modernist problem, not modern. Modern is an accident of birth. We're all modern, relatively speaking. But modernist is a mindset. Modernist is a philosophy. And modernism is essentially the denial of the supernatural. And when you deny the supernatural, then everything becomes a matter of change, of evolution. And we'll see that. Here's what happens when you try to substitute the natural for the supernatural when the supernatural needs properly to exist. Here's what happens when you try to mix truth and error. It's not going to work. What is a rustic cautionary tale of admixture? Well, here's one. Back where I grew up, which was rustic, in the north woods of New Hampshire, a beautiful place to grow up. But people told you things by way of analogy that were hard to miss. You have a bucket of wine and a bucket of manure. Okay? If you take a cup of the wine and you put it into the manure, you still have a bucket of wine and a bucket of manure. If you put a teaspoon of the manure into the bucket of wine, you have 2 buckets of manure. Oh, surely you just have a taste. The nose is so piquant. It's got a certain je ne sais quoi. Sure it does. Sure it does. We hope the nightmare is ending. It's been said about the theology that surrounds Vatican II that we're going to have to suffer through this until the last cleric related in any way to Vatican II has died. Hey, 50 years went by in a blink of an eye. 50 years went by in a blink of an eye. God is patient, certainly more patient than we are. And culturally speaking, until the Woodstock love quilt of garbage and filth that's been smothering culture for the last 50 years finally rots away, and the last unrepentant hippie in his fading tie-dye T-shirt gets into the wheelchair and rolls off into the sunset, with Creedence Clearwater Revival blaring in his ears, stubbing his last marijuana joint, and just goes away, we're going to have to suffer through this. It's got to stop. And it's not cute anymore, and they're not teenagers anymore, and it's pathetic. Talk to my students all the time. What's wrong with rock and roll? It's not a musical problem. It's a maturity problem. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I thought as a child, I recreated as a child, I ate as a child. But now that I'm an adult, I don't listen to childish things, and I don't eat Cocoa Puffs. You give up the things of a child. Why? Because you're an ordered man. You're not inverted. More on that later. Ultimately, God's in charge. We'll get through this. But when we talk about new music and the new Mass, here's an early punchline regarding that. It's perfectly appropriate. Could be the end of the conference. I mean, really, it's the as I say, the musical punishment that fits the liturgical crime. What you heard in the Bird was old music for an old Mass. That music is not appropriate for the new Mass. So new music, new Mass, they fit. They go together like two things that are alike. I'm being so good. I really am. I'm trying. For all you folks out here later watching this in the future, hello, future selves. I'm trying to behave myself. All right, let's move on before I really get cranked up. All right, principles, definitions. We got to talk about the Mass. We've got to talk about music and liturgy because the Church has spoken often, sometimes very succinctly, about the role music plays in the Mass. Then we've got to talk about modernism because it's really about, talk about a new priest for a new Mass. All of this is designed for a new man. And the new man just doesn't pop into being in 1969. The process of making a modern man has been going on for a long time. All right. The Mass. Talk about the old Mass first. This is quo primum. This is doctrine. All right? This is what the Mass is. Now, therefore, in order that all, everywhere, may adopt and observe what has been delivered to them by the Holy Roman Church, mother and mistress of the other churches, it shall be unlawful henceforth and forever throughout the Christian world to sing or to read Masses according to any formula other than that of this missal published by us, Council of Trent. It's just so... I wish he'd just come out and say what he meant. You know, these old... it's so unclear. The ambiguity, it just drives me crazy. I mean, you could see why the reform of the reformed reform needed to happen because, just tell us what you want. All right, well, nor shall bishops, administrators, canons, chaplains, and other secular priests or religious of whatsoever order or by whatsoever title designated be obliged to celebrate Mass otherwise than enjoined by us. We likewise order and declare that no one whosoever shall be forced or coerced into altering this missal, and that this present Constitution can never be revoked or modified, but shall forever remain valid and have the force of law. Have you heard those quotes before? That's been around for a long time. That's the Mass. No, you could go back and see all the particulars, but you don't have to because you see it every Sunday. That's the Mass. Valid, force of law, never revocable, forever. What about the new Mass? Hannibal the cannibal rears his ugly head again. The architect. Now, it's interesting. Brian and I both used this version of the quote. This is actually Archbishop Lefebvre quoting Bugnini. He's actually more particular than this. We must strip from our Catholic prayers and from the Catholic liturgy everything which can be the shadow of a stumbling block or a source of discomfort. That's in there too, not in this one. For our separated brethren, period. That is for the Protestants. That's the Archbishop's commentary on that. It's even worse than that. Paul VI. Poor Paul VI. This novelty is no small thing. You think? At some point it occurred to him that, and he says this, he'll admit to this from time to time, saying, we threw open the windows to let in the new springtime and all that, and the smoke of Satan entered the church. Yeah, and you left the door open, and you sent in the clowns. You can't stop this thing once you start it. Benedict XVI, days ago, weeks ago, the idea of a better church created by ourselves, key point, is in fact a proposal of the devil, key point, with which he wants to lead us away from the living God, obvious point, through a deceitful logic by which we are too easily duped, said one of the prime dupers. This is one of the philosophical, theological architects of the Second Vatican Council, former Cardinal Ratzinger. Brilliant man. Guilty conscience? Wow. All right. What about music? The Council of Trent addressed music, session 22. Remember, the council happens over the course of several years in three big chunks. This was necessary. I mean, there were legitimate abuses, right? Father talked about the church. This is ironic, isn't it? We have an infallible institution, an eternal institution left to the governance of fallible men. Mistakes will happen. But just as you don't, we reject the ad hominem argument, right? You might have a terrible person who's a doctor, but he's still capable of healing you. You might have a horrible individual who's a chef, but he can still cook you food that keeps you alive, right? People make mistakes. Priests make mistakes. Abuses happen. And a lot of them happen before Council of Trent. Remember, we're not going to get too much into this, but, Luther had a point. Every third point, he had a point. All right, you read the 95 Theses, it's basically three big chunks of beefs, right? The one beef about indulgences, the one beef about papal infallibility, and then a sort of general pool of beefs about administrative abuses. These are legit. And the church says, hey, Marty, you got a point. How about the Council of Trent to address these issues? And come on back. Long gone. Long gone. He was not coming back. But anyway, there were abuses. There were musical abuses. This is a Bishop Franco, and he's writing about how things were in the early part of the 1500s. In our times, they put all their industry and efforts, the composers that is, into the composition of fugues, technical word, so that while one voice says Sanctus, the other says Sabaoth, still another Gloria Tua, with howling, bellowing, and stammering, so that they more nearly resemble cats in January than flowers in May. Oh, it gets worse. By the end of the 19th century, it gets worse. This is what the church says. I'm going to go to the bottom quote first, because this is really all she says about music. They shall also banish from churches all those kinds of music in which, whether by the organ or in the singing, there is a mixing up of anything lascivious or impure. That's it. You can say it in one breath. All right. It goes on. As also all secular actions, vain and therefore profane conversations, all walking about noise and clamor. You remember that video that you saw? So that the house of God may be seen to be and may be called truly a house of prayer. That's what Trent says about music. Up above, she says, take it seriously if you're doing this stuff. I'm always, I tremble whenever I have to ask Father, who is vesting in the sacristy, something about the liturgy that's just about to happen. Because you don't want to, I don't know, start the wrong Mass or sing the wrong preface. Or so occasionally, but he's in his place. Serious stuff. All right. This is Motu Proprio Tra le Sollecitudini, 1903. This is one of the first things that Pope St. Pius X writes. And he writes about music. Context, right? This is very important. A lot of people use Tra le Sollecitudini for their own ends. They're the only Gregorian chant people which use it for their ends. There is the only polyphony people that use it for their ends. It's neither of those people is right, because it's about balance. It's about hierarchy, for sure, but it's about balance. But he's coming out of the era, especially in Italy, where there were reports of masses which essentially took the entire score of Lucia da Lammermoor, which is an opera by Donizetti, and set Latin text to it, and they just sang the whole thing. Horrifying. It's basically theatrical, operatic masses. They're Italians, right? A little over the top. I can say that because I'm Italian. But no longer fitting. This is no longer an attitude of prayer. This is what he says. So this is from the introduction. I know you can read this, but I want to say it out loud. This is for the tape, and also just to reinforce a little bit. Nothing should have place. Nothing should have place, therefore, in the temple calculated to disturb or even merely to diminish the piety and devotion of the faithful. Nothing that may give reasonable cause for disgust or scandal. Nothing, above all, which directly offends the decorum and sanctity of the sacred functions and is thus unworthy of the house of prayer and of the majesty of God. Don't you wish popes wrote like that anymore? Wow. And indeed, whether it is owing to the very nature of this art, he's talking about music now. He's being very, very politic here. He's trying to give music an out. He's trying to explain why. He's not trying to shut things down. He's trying to explain why music of all arts might be subject to abuse. Whether it is owing to the very nature of this art, fluctuating and variable as it is in itself, or to the succeeding changes in tastes and habits with the course of time, or to the fatal influence exercised on sacred art by profane and theatrical art, so he's really getting at, or to the pleasure that music directly produces and that is not always easily contained within the right limits. That's an amazing admission. He loved music. I'll read that again. All right, what's the danger? Music produces pleasure directly and not always easily contained within the right limits. You remember St. Augustine writing about the dangers of the pleasure of music. Very powerful. You don't think the people who've got complete control of the hearts and therefore minds of your children and grandchildren don't know that? Goodness. Maybe the most dangerous thing that our kids face is their music. Why? Because nobody thinks it's a problem. You would never let them watch the equivalent of what you let them listen to. Don't think that's right? Print me the lyrics. That's what I say to the kids. Can I listen to this? Print me the lyrics. I'm going to read them to your mother as a poem. Really? I'll do it. Can we edit that out, Pete? Are we? All right, thanks. Just making sure. It's live. We're streaming live. Oh, no. All right. So lightly introduced and so tenaciously maintained even among responsible and pious persons, the fact remains that there is a general tendency to deviate from the right rule. Abuse happens. All right. So more on the introduction. I love this. I love this. This is about the dignity of the temple. It is vain to hope that the blessing of heaven will descend abundantly upon us when our homage to the Most High, instead of ascending in the odor of sweetness, puts into the hand of the Lord the scourges wherewith of old the divine Redeemer drove the unworthy profaners from the temple. Gulp. It's a beautiful admonition, but that's a heck of an admonition. All right? It's got to be a sense of the sacred. It has to be. All right, sacred music being complementary part of the solemn liturgy participates in the general scope of the liturgy. Right? This is about hierarchy. Must be holy, therefore exclude all profanity, not only in itself, but in the manner in which it is presented by those who execute it. It's hard to be holy when you're doing something inherently unholy. When you're gyrating and dancing up around and waving your hands back and forth, it's hard to be holy. That's a contradiction. And yeah, we could get started on the vestments, but let's not. Let's not. The more in harmony, I'm talking about Gregorian chant, the more, let's see, I don't want to read the whole thing. The more closely a composition for church approaches Gregorian chant in its movement, inspiration, and savor, the more sacred and liturgical it becomes. The more out of harmony it is with that supreme model, Gregorian chant, the less worthy it is of the temple. Okay? Polyphony, yes, side by side, has been found worthy of a place side by side with Gregorian chant in the more solemn functions of the church. Very important point, number 5. All right? This is not to say, no, we will calcify, we will exclude everything that is not chant. Doesn't say that. He says, the church has always recognized and favored the progress of the arts, supported, patronized, admitting to the service of religion everything good and beautiful discovered by genius in the course of ages, always, however, with due regard to the liturgical laws. Consequently, modern music is also admitted to the church, since it too furnishes compositions of such excellence, sobriety, and gravity that they are in no way unworthy of the liturgical functions. Remember, when William Byrd was composing for the Mass, he was a contemporary composer. Palestrina was, by definition, it's redundant to say so, a contemporary composer when he wrote. Of course it has a place. It's just not garbage. Language of the proper Roman Church is Latin. Hence, it is forbidden to sing anything, whatever, in the vernacular, in solemn liturgical functions. The employment of the piano is forbidden in church. Remember our lovely meditation on Thais that we heard for the presentation of the gifts by the folks in the wheelchairs. All right? Also that of noisy or frivolous instruments, such as drums, cymbals, bells, and the like. Oof. Some of you, if you were properly horrified by the sight of that drum set the first time you saw it in the sanctuary, I'm sure you get some time off of purgatory for that. I mean, what a cross. What a cross. It is strictly forbidden to have bands play in church. We'll hear about that in a minute. And only in special cases, with the consent of the ordinary, will it be permissible to admit wind instruments. Yeah, you can have a trumpet in church. It's got to be tasteful. It's got to be appropriate. But you can have it. Limited in number, judiciously used in proportion to the size of the place. You probably shouldn't have a trumpet in your chapel that seats 20 people. But my word, is there anything more glorious than hearing a piccolo trumpet playing along with the organ in the cathedral? Oof. It's almost like it lifts your mind to God. It really does. Okay. Anyway, this is just a beautiful follow-on quote at the bottom about chant. This really is true. This really is true. Gregorian chant, restored in such a satisfactory way to its early purity, is sweet, soft, easy to learn, and of a beauty so fresh and full of surprises that wherever it has been introduced, it has never failed to excite zeal or real enthusiasm in the youthful singers. That's a beautiful quote, and it's absolutely true. Children love chant, inherently. they're not necessarily very good at it. And I would take a little bit of issue with it's easy to learn my word. I've never worked on harder material than chant. Opera sings itself. You just have to be loud. Chant is really hard. It's really beautiful, though. And yet, you can attain a level of success wherever you start. It's beautiful. It's meant for you. All right. Vatican II talks about music and liturgy, too. And here's one of those frustrating examples where if you read it, you would say, oh, it sounds all right. But as always, you got to look for the little, you could call them time bombs, you could call them cow patties. You're going to step in it if you don't watch out for it with this stuff. Musical tradition of the Universal Church is a treasure of inestimable value, greater than that of any other. Thanks for saying so. Any other art. The main reason for this preeminence is that as sacred song unites with the words, it forms a necessary or integral part of the solemn liturgy. Yes, well said. Liturgical worship is given a more noble form when the divine offices are celebrated solemnly in song, with the assistance of the sacred ministers, and wait for it, and the active participation of the people. And that's kind of an eyebrow raise. That's not quite a cow patty yet. In the Latin Church, the pipe organ is to be held in high esteem. Absolutely. But watch out for that one. I put the really dangerous conjunctions in pink, just so we don't miss it. Other instruments also may be admitted for the use in divine worship. This may be done, however, only on condition that the instruments are suitable or can be made suitable for sacred use. Right? So if I change the guitar strap to fit the color of the liturgical season, I guess that's made somehow suitable. According to the dignity of the temple, although you've seen some of these churches, I'm not sure what dignity they inspire, truly contribute to the edification of the faithful. Time bombs, dangerous. The decisions of the council have already been put into effect in recently undertaken liturgical renewal. Renewal. Already taken effect. Really? 67? Surely not. That must have been a spontaneous thing. It must have been such a good thing that it just sort of burst forth. Like a prairie fire or some other monstrously destructive thing that had been planned long in advance. Wow. I mean, the new Mass came from nowhere. No, it didn't. I live in St. Mary's, Kansas, site of an old Jesuit cemetery and a beautiful old church that burned down. I'm not saying this is why the church burned down, but we have records indicating that prototypes of the new Mass were practiced in this old Jesuit cemetery in 1948. This didn't come from nowhere, folks. It didn't come from nowhere. Whenever, for liturgical service, which is to be celebrated in song form, one can make a choice between various people, it is desirable that those who are known to be more proficient in singing be given preference. I mean, this only makes sense, doesn't it? Why? This is especially the case in more solemn liturgical celebrations. And what are the most solemn liturgical celebrations at all? The ones who are to be transmitted by radio or television, right? It's goodness. This is the new church for sure. No kind of sacred music is prohibited from liturgical actions by the church as long as it corresponds to the spirit of the liturgical celebration itself. Yeah, we can make that happen, can't we? All right? And the nature of its individual parts and does not hinder the active participation of the people altogether now. Yes. Active participation of the people. That's why you're there. And in some ways, it's true. How are you supposed to actively participate in the right? Mind, heart, not necessarily hooting and hollering. 48 says that you can have a Latin Mass. I mean, if it's for the people in big cities who need it, right? New melodies, right? They need to undergo a period of experimentation in order that they may attain a sufficient maturity and perfection. We're going to hear how mature and perfect some of these things are in just a minute. However, this is Vatican II saying this. I could go back to this and show it to the praise leader at the Church of the Poisoned Mind, or wherever they're doing what they're doing. All right? However, anything done in churches, even if only for experimental purposes, which is unbecoming to the holiness of the place, the dignity of liturgy and the devotion faithful, must be avoided. You can quote Vatican II to people who are abusing common sense, if nothing else. Goodness sake. Remember, the good stuff is always there. That's the admixture thing. All right? We'll talk about that when it comes to the modernism. They don't want to destroy. They don't want to leave. They want to stay. Destroy from inside. In permitting and using musical instruments, remember we had no frivolous instruments, according to Pius X. The culture and traditions of individual peoples must be taken into account. Remember, we must celebrate cultural diversity. However, those instruments which are by common opinion in use, suitable for secular music only, are to be altogether prohibited from every liturgical celebration and from popular devotions. Now, there might be somebody out there who doesn't think that an electric guitar is only for secular use. Remember, there's still a chance that you can abuse this. This says a pretty good thing. We just ignore it. All right, here's the problem. All of these errors are foisted on people willing to accept them. Right? And that doesn't include everyone in this room. All right? So we're looking at this from an outside perspective. But the fact of the matter is, we got the philosophy, we got the theology, we got the liturgy that we deserved, or at least we were ready to receive it. The collective we. Right? Modernism. It's all about new, and it's been around for a long time. We talked about one sort of razor this morning. I'm talking about Occam's razor. William of Ockham. This goes back a long time. This idea that you can separate faith and reason. There's still faith. There's still reason. But they're distinct. This is a very dangerous concept. That was dangerous in the 13th century. That is dangerous now. The Beagle, 1830s. This is Charles Darwin, right? What's the deal with Darwin? He's not much of a naturalist, and he's not much of a writer, and he's not much of a philosopher, but he's a convenient tool. If your goal is to prove scientifically that there's no such thing as an absolute, if you can do that in nature, you can certainly do that in ideas. Evolution, transmogrification. No absolute truth. God himself, in order to be vital, must change. Don't you love the 19th century? They're all so cute. Ralph Waldo Emerson. The problem is they write really beautifully, some of them. Emerson's one of them. Jesus Christ belonged to the true race of prophets. He saw with open eye the mystery of the soul. Drawn by its severe harmony, ravished with its beauty, he lived in and had his being there. That is gorgeous writing. It also happens to be really dangerous. Alone in all history, he estimated the greatness of man. 1838, folks. Harvard, of course. Goodness sake, those people. Get a real Ivy. One man was true to what is in you and me. He saw that God incarnates himself in man and evermore goes forth anew to take possession of his world. Who's his? Interesting. That's dangerous. That's Harvard for you. The popes see this, of course. Pius IX. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. If you haven't read the Syllabus of Errors, do yourself a favor. You want to make yourself feel better, read the Syllabus of Errors. Read how a real pope writes. It's great. Now, you got to be careful because he's writing in the positive the thing that he's condemning. All right? So you always have to be careful with the whole anathema business. Pantheism. This is wrong. The erroneous pantheist says this: there exists no supreme, all-wise, all-provident divine being distinct from the universe, and God is identical with the nature of things and is therefore subject to changes. In effect, God is produced in man and in the world. He knew what Emerson was saying. And all things are God and have the very substance of God, and God is one and the same thing with the world, and therefore spirit is one and the same thing with matter. Necessity is one and the same thing with liberty. Good is one and the same thing with evil. Justice with injustice. That's wrong. The Pope sees that. Naturalism is wrong. All actions of God upon man and the world, all action is to be denied. Denial of the supernatural. Absolute rationalism. Human reason, without any reference whatsoever to God, is the sole arbiter of truth and falsehood, and of good and evil. It is a law to itself, and suffices by its natural forces to secure the welfare of men and actions. Peace, love, and brotherhood. All of these things are anathema. The perfect sit. You know how that goes. Afterwards, you say, anathema sit. All right, let it be anathema. So, can we edit that out? I mean, that was supposed to be funny. Oh, shoot, Pete. All right. The perfect, never mind. This is the thing. I've called this, and I'll say it again. This is probably the most important document written in the 20th century. Pascendi Gregis Dominici. 1907. It's long-ish, but I mean, it's an afternoon's read. In English. Father, you ever read it in Latin? Yeah. I'll bet the precision is blinding. Reform. They follow willingly and wittingly, both because it is part of their system that authority is to be stimulated, but not dethroned. It might be simulated. In any case, the point is, you're not trying to overthrow authority. You need it. And because it is necessary for them to remain within the ranks of the church in order that they may gradually transform the collective conscience. That's why it's different. Moreover, they lay the axe not to the branches and shoots, but to the very root, that is, to the faith and its deepest fires. And having struck at this root of immortality, they proceed to disseminate poison through the whole tree, so that there is no part of Catholic truth from which they hold their hand, none that they do not strive to corrupt. Certainly, this suffices to show superabundantly by how many roads modernism leads to the annihilation of all religion. The first step in this direction was taken by Protestantism. The second is made by modernism. The next, remember this is 1907, the next will plunge headlong into atheism. And now, can anybody who takes a survey of the whole system be surprised that we should define it as the synthesis of all heresies? Were one to attempt the task of collecting together all the errors that have been broached against the faith, and to concentrate the sap and substance of them all into one, he could no better succeed than the modernists have done. It's all there. And he goes through systematically to reveal every aspect of it. Okay? But what are the results for us? What are the results on the individual who breathes in this air? What sort of creature do you become? Do you become an intellectual giant and a monster? Some sort of dark angel? No. Just the opposite happens. You become a feeling rather than a thinking being. Because if everything is changing, if there's no absolute to hold to, what becomes true for you? What you want to be true. What is the law? How do you read? You will love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. What's the difference between Catholicism and Protestantism? How do you prove this collective love as a Catholic? You prove your love for your neighbor by how you love God. So the Protestants change nothing, but what happens? You prove your love of God by how you love your neighbor. And how do you love your neighbor? Well, you just ask him what he wants in order to feel loved. Very dangerous. I feel, therefore I am. It is an inversion thing, and we should understand it. All right. Here you are. That's my own artwork, by the way. Sure, yeah. I'll put that on. That'd be good. We should sell little guy T-shirts, don't you think? That'd be good for the next conference. So you've got an intellect, you've got emotions, and you've got passions or appetites, whatever you want to call them. When you're in the right order, these things are hierarchical. Sure, you have passions, you have appetites. Remember, we're not meant to be angels. A man without emotions, remember, angels don't feel anything. No emotions. It's not an angel, he's a machine, he's a monster. Okay? So it's got to be in the right order. You cannot separate yourself from your heart. It's a huge part of you, and Christ himself knows that. He's the only thing in the whole system other than you who's got the combination of a potentially angelic intellect and a human heart. You understand that? No angel has a heart. But God himself does. It's there for a reason, right? And it's to help you not succumb to your animal instincts, to your appetites, to your passions, which are necessary to keep you alive as a corporal being. But if these things get turned upside down, you're in trouble. And what the philosopher wants to do, he's not so much worried about that lower arrow. Okay? But what he wants to do, the modernist philosopher wants to invert those top things. Confuse the issue of feeling and thinking. And you see it all around you. And you hear it in culture. You see it in art. I mean, a perfect inversion would be, musically speaking, of course, is rap. Right? Because the ancients will tell us that there's a correspondence with these centers with elements of music. Right? We've talked about this before. Melody is intellectual. Harmony is emotional. Rhythm is passionate. And if you have a music which is predominated by rhythm, might have a smattering of harmony and has no melody whatsoever because people are yelling at you, you've got, by definition, an inverted thing. But we don't want to be inverted people. As I said, the problem with our friend who's canceled her subscription is not that she can't think. Maybe she misread. But my guess is emotional response first, justification for the emotional response, rather than seeing the thing for what it is and then dealing with the fact that you've got an emotional response and maybe, heaven forbid, having to suppress that emotional response because it's not appropriate if you want to maintain your psychological equilibrium. All right. How are we doing time-wise? We're okay. A couple more minutes. Francis I, I'm not allowed to say that. That's a little bit cheeky. How come I can't say that? Because it has to be a Francis II before there can be a Francis I. It's like I can't be a senior if there's no junior. All right? There might be a junior. Did I tell you that, Father? I did tell you that. My wife's expecting. Isn't that wonderful? Thank you very much. It's been a while. Our youngest is 7. She's significantly younger than I am. She is. My wife, that is, and my children are too. She's 13 years younger than I am. She looked at me after she had absorbed the initial shock and said, "You're going to have a baby after you're 50. That's gross." I said, "Thank you, darling. That's my girl. That's my girl. She's great." So yeah, I'm 50. I think maybe this whole conference is celebrating the anniversary of the year of my birth. Don't you think, Brian? It's my younger brother back there. Anyway, 50th anniversary of Musicum Sacrum. Contemporary Catholic music is mediocre, superficial, and banal. Thank you very much. Way to go, Holy Father. Interesting. They say the right things. Is it one? All right, what are the marks of new music for the new Mass? Is it one? Of course it's not. It's obsessed with diversity. Unfortunately, it all sounds exactly the same. All this, what is my technical term that I invented for it? Homogenized, faux ethno-musicological technicolor psychobabble with a backbeat, right? That's what it is. It all sounds the same, right? But we're trying to be diverse. And all these cultures, all of these, right? The spirit of the place. No. Is it holy? All right, there's an organization out there, quote, Organization X is here to prove that there is a place for hip-hop music in the church, and they are ready to show Catholic music fans that hip-hop can be holy. I don't want you to show me that. Is it Catholic? What's the philosophical necessity of the vernacular? Think about it. This is a logical exercise, right? Latin is a what language? Dead language. Why is it dead? Because it doesn't change. Therefore, what is life? Interesting. That's a very tidy syllogism, but for the modernist, death essentially is the inability to change. Well, guess what? Sometimes you shouldn't. That's Catholic. The ability not to change. When it's appropriate not to change. It's a beautiful thing. Apostolic? Well, sort of. There was an evangelization of sorts, but it was the church who was evangelized by the world. That's the admixture. And we think we can retain all of our pomp and all of our, but we'll just take a little bit. Doesn't work that way. 2 buckets of manure. All right, what's out there? You can buy this, and I don't mean to besmirch the character of this organization, GIA. It's a legit publishing house, and the important thing is they are considered very conservative. So this is the stuff that you can buy for your praise and worship, whatever, at Saint whoever's Catholic Church. This is what's on offer. There's some loaded words in here. The Assembly Mass, SATB choir, cantor, assembly, of course. That's so it's not just the choir that sings. It's got to be your active participation. Guitar, of course. Got to have guitar. Beneath the Tree of Life. That's a snappy title. SATB cantor, presider. That's the magic word. Who is this? That's the priest. That's the priest. I've been, when I first met Father McMahon and Father Beck, they had been priests for a year. So I've been Catholic for 22 years now. My anniversary is the 1st of March. Last year, my faith was old enough to drink, which made me very happy. I have attended since... I hope the bar is open after this. Since I started the process of conversion, and when I was a little kid, my grandparents attended Mass their whole lives. They were Catholic. My mother fell away and came back. My mother came back to tradition. Great success story. But, we would go to Mass, and I didn't really notice anything. It looked a little bit like the Methodist church thing that we went to with my father. But I was in Santa Barbara doing a concert once back this would have been the mid-'90s now. Beautiful mission chapel. Oh, my word. Has ever been to Santa Barbara? Ever been to that? Oh, goodness. One of the great acoustics on the planet, as far as I can tell. Sang a concert in it, of course. I wasn't converted yet, but decided I was there on a Sunday. I'll go to Mass. I went up to the mission church, and there was the drum set and the guitar. They hadn't been in there. And then this fellow bops up to the mic and informed everybody there that, well, the presider will be Father Bob or whoever it was, but the celebrant is all of us. I didn't stay. But that's the mindset. So the presider. Community mass. We got the whole band's there. We got brass, quartet, sextet, octet, timpani. Got to get the percussion in there for sure. Jubilation mass. Handbells. Suspension cymbal. That's important. You all know what a tam-tam is, right? It's a gong. So suspension. It's a cymbal. It's about yay big, right? And it's hanging from and you whack it with a big old. They're fun to play. Not in church, please. Not in church. Tambourine, you got to have a tambourine. That's when you make sure Father's got his sort of rainbow stole on, but you get the tambourine going. Maybe he'll play it for you. This is one of my favorites, Mass for the World Church. It's a collection of ecumenical texts set to world music. It's babble. The introit, of course, is a psalm from South Africa, the Kyrie eleison, native North American, Gloria India, Credo Zimbabwe. Confession, Psalm 21. From Argentina, that's going to be snappy. Sanctus is from Nigeria, and the Agnus Stays from China. Isn't that great? Isn't that great? No, I'm glad that we've sort of overcome this patriarchal imposition of popery on these poor indigenous folks. Aren't they better left alone? Shouldn't we celebrate their traditions? Yeah, I celebrate the fact that they're Catholic and they go to Mass. Same Mass I go to. Mass of the Redeemer, triangles, and... the Samba Mass. I like that because it's got bongos. Remember, that's the good stuff. All right. How's it sound? Sorry I have to do this to you. But I have to. Sing along. I know you can. The finger cymbals are genius. I mean, that really makes it. I think that calls down some sort of spirit, don't you? Oh boy. Make it stop. All right. Now, that was the least distasteful version of that. I mean, we had to... Young man, have you ever heard that song before? All right. Have you ever sung that song before? Were you one of those cute little kids who sang that song? Yeah. Did you like that song, or did you think it was kind of dorky? Of course you thought it was dorky. This is what happens when you... It's a bit of a tangent, sorry. But we don't... You ever heard this in education? We need to find the children where they are. I know where they are. The point is to bring them higher. And here's what happens when you try to do things that make you look cool in your perception in the eyes of children. You look like a dork. It's never worked and it never will. They might not like you for insisting that they come up higher, but they will respect you. No one respects this stuff. It's awful. I'm getting depressed. Ooh, that's a money move right there. What about the piano? Are we supposed to do that in church? Taste and see the goodness of the Lord. I need a drink. The goodness of the Lord. And then you got this guy. I will bless the Lord. Who's always got to be about a quarter step flat. His praise ever in my heart. Is that marijuana I smell in your breath? Probably. Oh, kids, it's going to get worse before it gets better. Not kidding about this. Not kidding about this. Oops. Go back, go back, go back. I poked it too hard. Maybe it's not meant to be. You know, the experimental things, they just need time to mature. We praise you. that guy, he really makes it. That's how you know it's real.
But it says glory. I quite like that guy who's screaming like he's just got his head slammed in the door. Oh, my word. Sanctity of the temple. Sanctity of the temple. This will be better, won't it? How did anyone remain Catholic?
Lamb of God, who take away the sins of the world, have mercy on us. Lamb of God, who take away the sins of the world, have mercy on
Fade out is their own. So I'm not sure how you pulled that off live. You ever get that? You listen. Remember those old songs you would listen to, and there'd be the dramatic fade out. You say, how do they do that in concert? So anyway, I maybe it just went on forever. Maybe it's still going on. Sinking feeling it might be. All right, this is it. You made it. There's a few more minutes of musical clips to listen to, but you made it. There's cause for hope. What promise are we talking about? God will not leave us orphans, right? Not liturgical orphans, not philosophical orphans, not theological orphans, not cultural orphans. It might be harder to find this stuff, but it's still there. For a long time, if we wanted real culture, we had to go back and find it. But we know that God will not abandon us. So therefore, in every age, the true, the good, and the beautiful will exist. And we're going to hear some of that. Here's the irony. So this started out as a talk about new music for the new Mass. That music's not new anymore. It isn't. It's awful. It's pathetic. It's an old hippie. It's an old hippie. Is there anything more pathetic than that guy? You know? Still rocking the Grateful Dead t-shirt, and golly. There is new music being written, but it's being written for the old Mass. And that's what's hopeful. That's what's hopeful. All right, here's some of these folks, because they still exist. Yeah, Kevin's there, Mark is there, Nicholas Wilton, who you probably don't know, is there. But we'll go through these. This is Peter Kwaniewski, a wonderful speaker and writer, pretty good singer too. So here this is, modern day organum. Kevin Allen, wonderful composer. We have some of his music
in the books that we teach to our children at St. Mary's Academy.
Domine, non sum Deus,
2010.
non sum Deus, ut intre subtectum meum. Domine, non sum Deus, non sum Deus, ut intre subtectum meum. Sed tantum dicere, sed tantum dicere, et sabitur anima meam, anima
Mark Nowakowski. We were in contact, and he says, there are a bunch of us out. We've got Mass music. We're writing for the Mass. But nobody's doing it. We're doing it. So we had St. Joseph's March 19th. We did Nicholas Wilton's Missa Brevis. 800 kids singing a newly composed Mass for the old Mass. Beautiful stuff. Here's Mark. Oh, it's a beautiful piece. It's only about half of it. There's another 3.5 minutes of that left. I'm going to try to convince him to let us sing that in a concert next year. We'll see. He's very proud of his Polish heritage. You can hear the East in that, can't you? You can also hear the Catholic in it. Sacred music for sacred space for a sacred liturgy. All right, we're going to end with this. This is Nicholas Wilton, English composer. As I said, we've sung his Missa Brevis in St. Mary's, and we're going to end with his O Sacrum Convivium. phrase that's been mentioned already. And these are my girls. These are my students. I'm very proud of them. But this is living music. Where I come from, they don't know any differently. This sounds perfectly normal to them. This is what we do. Do not lose hope. We are not scandalized by seeing Christ crucified on the cross. We cannot lose hope because the church is undergoing a crisis. God is patient. He tends to get his way. And guess what? The new Mass is going to be the old Mass. And music for it, it's already being written. All right, kept you too long. Thanks very much.